The Bob Murphy Show, episode 461.
There's a tidal wave coming. What you gonna do?
Get ready for another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. It's your source for commentary and interviews conducted by a Christian and economist. Now here's your host, Bob Murphy.
Hey everybody, welcome back to The Bob Murphy Show. Another solo episode. I think this is going to be the last one to get it out of my system, but I need to comment on the whole Nick Fuentes thing. The civil war brewing on the right. Since last I chimed in, Nick was on Tucker Carlson's show. Everybody lost their minds. Ben Shapiro came out with a 41-ish minute response that was widely trafficked, and then people responded to that. So actually what I'm doing in here, if you had to put your finger on it, is I'm responding to the neocon response to Nick being on Tucker's show. Okay, that's, I think, probably the way to handle it. Okay, and what I'm going to say here, so let me be clear at the outset. I don't have a problem with Dave or Glenn Greenwald or Tucker Carlson having Nick on their shows, and I don't even have that much of a problem with the way they conducted those interviews or discussions or whatever you want to call it. All right, it's not how I would have done it. If Nick ever wanted to come on my show, I'd certainly have him. I would be more adversarial for sure, but the idea of having someone on your show, especially someone who's got a bigger audience than you do, you're not, quote, platforming them. Okay, so that's not the issue. So just to be clear about that. And I am also not applauding what the response from the critics was to those guys having him on their show. What I'm gently criticizing here and trying to nudge in the more proper direction, if I may be so bold, is the response of some people, quote, on my side to the entirely predictable reaction from Ben Shapiro, Randy Fine, Lindsey Graham, and so forth. Okay, so that's what we're talking about here. All right, let me open just to get you to see the distinction I'm trying to make here and how things that from 30,000 feet might seem kind of the same, but when you zoom in, you can see, oh, there is a different way of doing it, and one might be more effective than the other. Let's do three examples. The first one we'll talk about when the neocons were pushing for the invasion of Iraq. All right? And we'll do like a door number one, door number two, in terms of how the critics of that proposal could have responded. So door number one would say something like, yes, you're right, Saddam Hussein is a terrible guy. I certainly wouldn't want to go live under his regime. He's awful. There are accounts of him slaughtering his own people. I haven't independently looked into all that stuff, but it wouldn't surprise me. He's a monster. Yep, sure, I've heard terrible stories. And if he's so bad, then I wonder why our government was funding him so much. And a lot of these weapons that you folks are worried that he has, he got them from us. Okay, so, and beyond that though, yeah, invading Iraq right now, that would not be in the interest of the United States, and here's some reasons why. Okay, so there's that framing. Door number two is, oh, here we go again. Saddam Hussein's the bad guy. There's all these bad guys around the world, and they're such monsters, and okay. You know who's really the monster is the U.S. government. They take more of my tax money than Saddam Hussein ever did. I mean, I don't know that I trust any of these allegations about he hurt his own people. Because they're coming. Look who's pushing those narratives. I don't know if I believe any of that stuff. All right. So in the grand scheme, those are similar. But do you see how door number one, I think, would be more appealing to people who are on the fence? And after all, that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to convince people who haven't made up their minds. For all these issues that I'm going to go through, and for the central issue under discussion in this episode, like U.S. government support for Israel and its wars, there are some people who, it doesn't matter what happens, they already know that they are totally against that. there are some people that they're totally for it, and no words coming out of our mouths or videos we put up or whatever are going to change them. But there are people in the middle that both sides are appealing to. And so that's what I'm talking about here, is which way of framing our position is going to be more appealing to those people who are of genuine goodwill and just don't know that much about a topic. And they're trying to decide, they see wildly disparate claims from the two camps, and they're just trying to evaluate them and see, who do I trust? Okay, different one. Example of drug prohibition or drug legalization, if you want to look at it that way. Okay, so the proponent of drug prohibition says, yeah, these drugs are really, cocaine, heroin, and so on, maybe marijuana, fentanyl, these are terrible scourges, and that's why they have to be, in fact, we need to ratchet up penalties on drug dealers. That's what we need to do to finally keep our kids safe. Okay, suppose you're a critic of that policy. What are two ways you could approach that? Door number one, you say, yes, drugs can be terrible, particularly if you get addicted to them. I certainly don't want my kids using heroin, experimenting, any of that kind of stuff. I teach them that. But ultimately, that's the way we're going to stop this problem, is it starts at the home. And in fact, if what you're worried about are things like, I noticed in your critique there of the situation, you pointed out how, these drug dealers are very violent, the cartels in Mexico and so forth, corrupting law enforcement. Also all the overdose deaths that you've cited over the last few years. All of those things I can show you are the result of drug prohibition. It's not because of the drug per se. So your very approach is causing this outcome that you're seeing. And so ultimately, I would say that what you're doing is just going to make the situation worse. Okay, so yes, it's a genuine problem. Certainly, I don't want to see people overdosing and being addicted to drugs and losing your job or whatever because you're a heroin addict. That's not good for anybody. That's terrible. But ultimately, I think the way we're going to solve this, we have to be smarter with our public policy. Okay, you can do something like that. Door number two would be like, oh, here we go again. Yeah, it's the new demon rum, right? They had the reefer madness videos in the 60s or whatever, talking about you're going to smoke a joint and all of a sudden just ruin your life or whatever. This stuff, it's always overblown. They were doing these drug commercials when I went through school. This is all a bunch of malarkey. Just, do what you want with your own body. It's not a big deal. Come on. I'm so sick of these people trying to tell me what to do. This is crazy. And the government, you know what? And the CIA traffics drugs too. So what do you think about that? All right. So why don't you stop doing that, you hypocrites? All right. They're worse than any alleged drug dealer is. And so really, I'm on Team Capone. Okay. You see the difference there? Okay. Last issue when it comes to Nick Fuentes and this alleged problem of Nazism or flirtation with fascism among the right wing in America. There's two ways you can handle that. Okay, door number one. I say, hey, there is a hardline distinction between opposing U.S. government support for Israel and the terrible things they're doing to the Palestinians, for example, not to mention what they're doing with Iran and whatever, that they're threatening to suck the United States into another war over there. And we want nothing to do with that. And there is a distinction between that view and people who are genuinely anti-Semitic, right? Now, people who are anti-Semitic obviously don't want the U.S. government giving tax dollars to Israel. That's obvious. But just because you don't favor the U.S. government giving tax dollars to Israel doesn't mean you're an anti-Semite. And yes, there has been an explosion of that stuff, and these comments appall me, right? If you go on Twitter, ever since October 7th especially, it's commonplace to see people just refer to someone and dismiss them as saying, okay, Jew, and move on, where that would have been inconceivable before then, or that would have just been some random troll. But now people openly talk like that. I've seen this explosion in anti-Semitism. Obviously, that's deplorable, but you know what? I'm sorry, guys, Ben Shapiro and people like that. You're partly to blame for this, because over the years, when people like Pat Buchanan or anybody else raised concerns, or Ron Paul raised concerns about the U.S. government support for Israel's bellicose military actions, guys like you, Ben Shapiro, denounced them as anti-Semites, right? And Ben, you had your famous tweet there talking about Ron Paul's holding that pen just like it's the neck of a Jew, and you spelled it J-O-O. When you know full well Ron Paul is not boiling over with hatred for Jewish people as such. That's crazy. That's a dirty smear, okay? But notice what happened. Since you guys acted like that and have acted like that for decades, for the older ones, Ben Shapiro, is relatively new to the game, what does that mean? That means you've cleared it out. So the only people that are willing to engage in these in this commentary are the ones who have nothing to lose. Just like with drug prohibition, right? The only people who are willing to engage in selling these products when they're prohibited are the violent criminals, people who are already breaking the law. And so what do they care? Okay? And so likewise here, that don't be surprised if any person in polite society knows if I touch the fact that the Israeli government seems to have a disproportionate influence on U.S. politics, then I am just going to be ostracized and labeled as an anti-Semite and a neo-Nazi. Well, most respectable people then shy away from that. And so that leaves a vacuum, and then the only people who fill it and talk about the legitimate grievances are people who also aren't afraid to be labeled anti-Semites because they are, or at least that's their official rhetoric, that they do put the whole show on display, right? So your guys' policy actually is leading to this outgrowth of deplorable anti-Semitism. Okay, so that's door number one. And then door number two is, here we go again, anti-Semite, everybody's a Nazi. Okay, give me a break. It's the same old story. That's all you guys ever say. No, that's not really an issue. There's like 4 Nazis in the United States. Give me a break, guys. That's not an issue. The real issue is U.S. government support of Israel. You know what? The U.S. government over the 20th century killed a lot more people than Adolf Hitler ever did, if you argue it and you really count it up properly. All right? You do something like that. So on those, I hope you see the dichotomy and the difference in approach. That I think door number one on all those issues made more sense. All right? As far as the title of this episode, Bootleggers and Baptists, or Baptists and Bootleggers, in case you don't know what the reference is, there's a famous economics paper that was explaining the political economy behind the rise of alcohol prohibition in the 1920s in the United States, and why there was the support for that. And they were saying there were 2 types of people, or 2 coalitions in the United States that were for alcohol prohibition. So on the one hand, you had the Baptists, the moralists, the people who genuinely didn't like the consumption of alcohol and thought it was a social evil and wanted to stamp it out. And they just said, oh, the natural thing to do is if you don't like something, just have the government punish people if they do it. QED. And then the other group that opposed, or that was for prohibition, were the bootleggers, the people who made black market alcohol, sold it that way, because they could only survive in a prohibited market. If you had a legal market where reputable companies could come in and produce beer and wine and so forth and spirits, then those bootleggers are out of business. Okay, so ironically, you had this joint interest of the avid churchgoers, the teetotalers, and guys like Al Capone. They were all united in wanting to keep alcohol officially illegal. Okay? And so I'm saying for the present context, there's this odd coalition between these 2 disparate groups. Who is it that wants to say there is a binary choice, that you have to either support the proposition that the U.S. government should not fund Israel, and that someone who holds that view also is skeptical of Jewish people as such, doesn't like Jews in general, and that's also why they don't want to support the Israeli government. Okay, or in the other camp, in this what I'm saying is a false dichotomy, the other end of this binary is to say, if you like Jewish people, you think the Holocaust was awful, you believe it happened, number one, and you think it was awful, and you don't think it's fair to judge people based on their ethnicity or their religion, you want to treat people as individuals, you don't like collectivism, well then naturally you support the U.S. government funding the Israeli government and supporting them in their military adventures. All right, so that is the false dichotomy that some people want to put on you. And I'm saying there's 2 types of groups that support that. Number one is guys like Ben Shapiro and Randy Fine, right? They want you to believe that if you like Jewish people, if you're not an anti-Semite, if you think the Holocaust happened and you wish it hadn't, then you necessarily must be in favor of the U.S. government being allied with the government of Israel and, giving them a blank check, right? And supporting them in their valiant defense against Hamas and so forth. That those two things go together. But you know who else wants that binary to exist? Are genuine anti-Semites. People who really do think Hitler was misunderstood, or, hey, he gets a bad rap. Okay, or, yeah, we really ought to look into the fact that, these Jews, they're only such and such percent of the population. Why do they have so much influence? These people are getting out of control. We need to do something about that, right? And that, therefore, obviously, you don't want the U.S. government supporting Israel, okay? So both of those groups want you to think that's the choice, when, in fact, that's not the choice. There is a clear alternative position which says you can oppose the U.S. government supporting the Israeli government and you don't have any ill will towards Jewish people per se, right? And I'm saying, ironically, the people who don't want you to think that's a possibility are the genuine anti-Semites, right? Because then, in other words, they want to say, no, anybody who agrees with us about America first, all the other stuff, you got to come along to ride for too. And so stop saying we're bad because we're racist or anti-Semites. No, we're not, right? Because America first, right? So they wanted that to be a package deal. And then the neocons also want it to be a package deal because they want to say, you agree with us, right? That the Holocaust sucked and that it happened, right? Everyone, we all cool. Raise your hand. Do you think the Holocaust happened? Do you think it was bad? Okay. If your hand is up now, you must agree with me, Ben Shapiro, that the U.S. government should support Israel's wars. He might not phrase it like that, but you get the point, right? So both camps want you to believe that. And I want to say no. So I think if you understood the framing there and what I'm showing you rhetorically, how the neocons and people beyond just that small subset, how they're operating here, the people that want the U.S. government to continue sending aid to the Israeli government with no strings attached, and hey, do whatever you want. Okay, in Gaza, that's cool. We'll defer to your judgment. I'm saying that you're conceding too much to them if you let them establish the narrative that, oh yeah, the only reason you could possibly oppose us on this is is because you're an anti-Semite. Now, you might be surprised at me saying this and say, Bob, that's what we've been saying all, what are you talking about? That's our go-to thing is we tell these guys that, no, you're So here's the nuance, all right? And here's where I think, and I'm going to give examples. I'm not just going to speak in generalities. I'm going to go through and give a lot of examples where I think, quote, my side has committed some unforced errors as this thing has unfolded. Right? Namely, there have been some comments and framing and so forth where somebody in the middle who hasn't made up their mind yet is looking at both camps would think that the non-interventionist camp is agreeing that, oh yeah, Nick Fuentes is saying the same thing we are. And so we're like Nick Fuentes. And so then they're put in the position, again, the people in the middle who haven't decided yet, is they have to decide, do I think Nick Fuentes is anti-Semitic? Do I think he's saying more than just America first? Because Ben Shapiro and those guys are telling me, no, this is fueled by anti-Semitism. And these people over here are saying, no, it has nothing to do with it whatsoever. And yeah, we're saying the same thing Nick Fuentes is. What's the big deal? What are you talking about? This is all just about aid to Israel. And then, geez, Ben Shapiro's showing me a bunch of clips. It sounds like Nick Fuentes is saying a lot more than that. Okay, so that's my concern. And so here, I'll go ahead and give you guys some specifics. Let me mention some of these specifics. I'm going to be focusing on Clint Russell. Just getting my ducks in a row here. Focusing on Clint Russell, okay? And let me mention, in case Clint's fans are here or our mutual fans in some cases, I checked beforehand. I told Clint, hey, I'm planning on doing an episode like this. I'm going to give you some pushback and some gentle criticism on the way you've been framing stuff. He understands. I'm not saying he agrees with me. He understands what I'm doing. He's like, yeah, go ahead. I'll watch it. All right. So Clint has even less hair than I do, arguably higher T. I don't know if he has more chest hair. So thus far, the only guy that has more chest hair I've encountered is my dad. But we're both big boys. We can handle this. I'm not going to hurt Clint's feelings with this. All right. So he knows I'm doing this in case anybody, Bob, did you see, dropped a hit piece on Clint. I can't believe it. Also, as I'm trying to ease the blow here, let me mention, I have loved Clint's show lately, that I think Clint is right to be following the whole who killed Charlie Kirk stuff, and that he's trying to be careful about it, whereas some other people are being a bit sloppy. All right. So I will say all that. Having said that, I think I need to give you guys specifics so you understand. Bob, why are you making this whole episode? What's your point? What are you talking about? Let me show you. Okay. So, for example, and this is the one that really started alarming me, is Clint back on October 31st, 2025, Halloween, on a thing that's got, as of me looking at this now, 49,497 views. He titled it, Nick Fuentes conquers TP USA without firing a shot. Okay, now, what does Clint mean by that? All right, what he meant was, I think this is when J.D. Vance went to a TP USA event, and the kids coming up, they weren't saying stuff like, hey, Mr. Vice President, I think 6 million is kind of a high figure. I think it's 3 at best. What do you think? That's not the kind of stuff they were asking. They weren't saying, for only being 2% of the population, they sure run a lot of banks, don't you think? No, they weren't asking anything like that. They were asking completely legitimate, reasonable questions about the influence of the Israeli government on U.S. politics, okay, and U.S. government support for Israel and how that was hurting us on a global stage and inviting blowback from our enemies or creating enemies when there doesn't need to be any on that dimension, okay? That's the stuff they were asking, okay? But I'm saying by Clint framing it like that, again, he's saying Nick has won, right? He's not saying even America first conquers TPUs. He's saying Nick does, okay? And so this is part of the framing here, and here, I'll give you a different example. This is a tweet that Clint put up. If Republicans governed in alignment with what the audience of Nick Fuentes demands, putting America first, they would win nearly every election. Instead, they do what Ben Shapiro demands and they get swept. But please tell me more about how Fuentes is destroying the GOP. Okay, so again, now notice it's a very subtle nuance there. And as I said to him, I don't have the full thing here because I just grabbed a screenshot and I wrote more than the tweet would allow. Like I had to do the show more, but it says, Clint, I really don't think libertarians should go along with Ben Shapiro's framing, namely that we have to pick him or Fuentes. I know exactly what you're saying in your tweet, but conservatives who just watched Shapiro's compilation, where he had a bunch of crazy stuff that Fuentes did, are going to, think differently. And again, I have a show more. All right. And then Clint says, I might as well just finish this while I got it up here. I appreciate your concern, but I'm not worried about convincing people dumb enough to trust a hit piece from Shapiro. Also, I made clear I'm referencing his audience in the America First mantra. I think they largely just want a government that actually prioritizes Americans. I agree. Okay, so you see there, again, don't misunderstand me, folks. Clint did not say anything wrong that I disagree with, anything false. What he means, what he's trying to get across is, what's Nick Fuentes all about? Oh, America First. Geez, that's the name of his show. Right? So when he's saying Nick Fuentes conquers Turning Point USA, he means the America First part. He doesn't mean all the other stuff that Nick is known for. Okay? And now let me go ahead here at this point, in case some people are watching and don't fully know, this is another thing. Guys, that 41-ish or whatever it was minute response from Ben Shapiro where he went after Tucker Carlson, yeah, he said some things about Tucker that were inflammatory and smear tactic-y and false and, so forth. But for this kind of reaction, Clinton say, oh, why would anyone trust a hit piece from Ben Shapiro? I got to get your head examined. Shapiro just needs to let Fuentes talk. Okay? So here, let me just give you some examples and you'll see what I'm talking about. So here, these are, what I'm doing here is I'm playing some clips that Ben Shapiro had on his show. Okay, so here's one about his views on Jews, blacks, and women.
Everybody kind of realizes women need to be taken down a peg. Women are in control. Women are running our lives. They're clearly not up to the task. They need to be taken down a peg. And equally, just like the obfuscation with Jews, you have all these people saying, no, that's not the problem. The problem is modern women. They say it's all these degenerate modern women. You need to find yourself a good girl who's traditional and Christian and conservative. It's like they're telling us what to do too. They're talking way too much too. Half the time when you go on Twitter and you have some stupid wagging her finger in your face, she's a Christian. She's got a Proverbs in bio. She's got a Bible verse in her bio. People say, no, it's just those degenerate, modern, left-wing, blue-haired feminist girls. I want a good trad Christian girl. Half the time, it's the girls with the Bible verses in the bio that are the problem. So they're always coming up with, no, it's not the Jews. No, it's not women. No, it's not blacks. It's actually really complicated. No, it isn't at all. Jews are running society. Women need to shut the blacks need to be imprisoned for the most part. And we would live in paradise. It's that simple. It's literally that simple.
Okay. So you see, when people are talking about, oh, wow, this kid's a racist, anti-Semite, or whatever, that's the kind of thing they have in mind. All right. And incidentally, too, I should mention Nick, in his response to this and other things, like complains about, oh, yeah, and they just play clips. Yes, they quote you. I don't know why that's like a dirty trick. Okay. And for people saying, oh, he's just taking them out of context. No, they're not. All right. The only context that could possibly save these kind of clips, and I'll play some more in a second, are if Nick started and said, hey, everyone, I'm working on a one-act play where I'm going to play a budding neo-Nazi. I hope you like it. Here we go. And then he launches into it. That's the only context that would possibly save these things. Okay. People call him a Holocaust denier. Where are they coming up with that? Right? They call Daryl Cooper a Holocaust denier. Is it the same kind of... Here, I'll show you.
It doesn't really sound correct to me. Wait a second. It takes 1 hour to cook a batch of cookies, and you have 15 ovens, probably in 4 different kitchens, right? Doing 24 hours a day, every day for 5 years. How long would it take you to make 6 million? I don't know. It certainly wouldn't be 5 years, right? The math doesn't seem to add up there. The math doesn't quite seem to add up there. I don't think you'd result in 6 million. Maybe 200 to 300,000 cookies. And I think the Red Cookie Association said something like that, probably 200 to 300,000 cookies baked, probably. And in addition, in this hypothetical, I imagine that if you took aerial photographs over the kitchens, you would need to see certain smokestacks to release the smoke from baking the cookies. And the smokestacks would project certain shadows, but I guess they're not visible in the aerial photographs taken over the kitchens. Moreover, if you look at the soil texture, it's really not deep enough for mass cookie storage underground.
So you see, the reason they're calling Nick Fuentes a Holocaust denier is because he denied the Holocaust. So again, if the response is, oh, here we go again with your smears to Ben Shapiro's episode there, I think that's going to fall flat on a lot of people's ears. They're going to say, he really did just deny the Holocaust, so I think it's kind of fair to call him a Holocaust denier since he denied the Holocaust, right? Okay. And then people say, oh, it's not like he doesn't actually want physical harm on people. I mean, he's been on talk shows and explicitly disavow. He doesn't, maybe it's like what, his feelings are or something like that, but it's not like he actually wants to hurt people or is threatening violence. Well, there's this.
There is an occult element at the high levels of society, and specifically among the Jews. So many of the people that are perpetrating the lies and the destruction on the country, they are evildoers. They are people that worship false gods. They are people that practice magic or rituals or whatever. And more than anything, those people need to be, when we take power, they need to be given the death penalty. Straight up. And I'm far more concerned about that than I am about even non-white people or mass migration.
these people that are communing with demons and engaging in this sort of witchcraft and stuff, and these people that are suppressing the name Christ and suppressing Christianity, they must be absolutely annihilated when we take power. This is God's country. This is Jesus's country. This is not the domain of atheists or devil worshippers or perfidious Jews. This is Christ's country.
Okay, and what's funny about that one is I saw somebody on Twitter complaining, like some guy posted that, and then some guy on Twitter was complaining about it, and the way he explained that away is he said, oh, come on, this is just, again, stuff taken out of context or whatever, and he said, I bet you if you went and looked at this in full context, it would be like a super chat or something, and somebody was asking him about like satanic, Satan worshipers and pedophiles and whatever doing child abuse who also were Jewish. I bet you that's what it is. And so, are you saying you're in favor of pedophilia? And so, what's hilarious about that is that I'm not going to replay it here, but Adam Heyman and I, when we did our initial foray into this genre, we played the clip. It's from the earlier one, where Nick winds up and talks about what needs to happen to Jews, blacks, and women. But earlier in that rant, Nick explicitly went out of his way to mock people who were tying themselves up in mental gymnastics to come up with all these reasons why it wasn't just the Jews. No, you need to be more nuanced. And he was saying, now some people will say it's satanic pedophiles, and some people will say, no, we trad people who are devoted to the free market. And no, it's pretty simple. It's the Jews. Okay, so the guy saying, no, you're taking him out of context. He was only wishing the death penalty upon these specific people who were abusing children and not the Jews per se. Elsewhere, Nick Fuentes has explicitly disavowed that. He thinks you, sir, are engaging in mental gymnastics with your attempted nuance because you're afraid just to say the truth, which is that it's the Jews per se who are our enemy. Okay? So with those clips, when people are saying, oh, geez, there's a problem on the right, and they're overlooking the fact, and this is just a festering thing that's growing, and can you imagine, you're a Jewish person who's been taught from the time you're little that, in various societies around the world, things can be fine, and then it can just flip really fast, and you've got to be ever vigilant. And you're seeing Nick saying, when we take power, we're going to give the death penalty to these people for suppressing the name of Christ. Can you see why that might be alarming? And if the response from a lot of people on the right is, here we go again, oh, Nazi. Okay, guys, you worry about everything. There's no big deal. While you're also saying Nick Fuentes just conquered Turning Point USA, and Dave Smith and Ian Carroll and Clint, when they're talking about just saying, this kid's just a powerhouse. I mean, Tucker and Candace tried to take him out earlier, and then they just completely surrendered, which I think is true. I think Tucker Carlson did try to take him out with the whole, he's just some gay kid in his mom's basement or whatever, and then realized that blew up in his face, and so said, okay, I got to just make peace with this kid. All right? So I think that's what happened. So I'm saying, which is it? What you can't say, which sounds like you're trying to do, and that's what I'm trying to point out in this episode of the Bob Murphy Show, is you're trying to have it both ways and say, oh, yes, Nick Fuentes is this rising powerhouse, and he does represent us in America first and everything. And, that other stuff about, the oven joke. That's just, come on, he's making some jokes. Who cares about that? That's nothing. That's not really intrinsic to what he's all about. And I say, I think a lot of people aren't going to buy that last part. All right, let me continue. Let's take a break from the action, folks, for me to remind you, if you like what you're hearing on the Bob Murphy Show, and come on, is there really another podcast like this out there? I don't think so. If you like what you hear, I encourage you to support it. Go to bobmurphyshow.com/contribute. Every little bit helps. I really appreciate it. bobmurphyshow.com/contribute. All right, let's get back to the show. Here's another example of something that alarmed me on Twitter. Okay, so, who was it? It might have been Mark Levin. I can't see who I was responding to, but some character like that came out. Yeah, I think it was Levin, and he was like, "Oh, the little Nazi got mad," and he's like, he's doing his cranking out brain farts, and he just did this real old man, goofy, like, hey there, fellow internet kids, I'm cool too, and I can meme, right? So Mark Levin just said some goofy stuff, thinking he was blowing up Fuentes, And so I said to Mark Levin, Fuentes is hoping you will keep reacting like this. Your Twitter strategy is as sound as your foreign policy. Okay, so there I was making fun of Mark Levin. I wasn't criticizing Fuentes there. And then some Fuentes fan comes in and says, what's the point in counter-signaling guys like Fuentes? Have you ever listened to his monologues in context, not clipped to make him look bad? He actually is impressive and more sophisticated than his enemies, and admittedly his fans, would have you think. Okay, again, this idea that we're doing something outrageous by clipping him, praising Hitler and whatnot. I don't know. No, I don't think I did it. Here, he praises Hitler too. Here we go.
Buddy, it's Führer Friday. It is Hitler Friday. Shut up. It is Heil Hitler Friday. Heil Hitler, all my Nazis.
Hitler was a pedophile and kind of a pagan. It's like, well, he was also really cool. So, time to grow up. We're not children anymore. Am I right? Am I right? Am I right, boys? Am I right? Let's go. He was also really cool.
Okay, so when we say he praises Hitler, we don't mean metaphorically. All right, we're not connecting the dots. He openly does. Okay, so with all this stuff, he goes, "Oh, it's a joke," but again, it's people are being lectured to by Fuentes fans saying, well, "There you go again, quoting him." Geez, guys, where do you get off quoting him? Okay, fine. Look at the next thing though. This is what alarmed me and pushed me over the edge as to why I need to do this episode. He's referring to Fuentes. He's this generation's Buchanan, except much better at playing the media and earning loyalty. His rise to prominence is an unambiguous W for anybody who would see the neocons dethroned. Okay, and I'm saying that move, now this guy, I don't know if he's a Rothbardian or something. I hope he actually isn't. That is the opposite of, I think, what we should be telling the world. All right? Because here's what happened over the years. When Pat Buchanan comes out and he's got, his book on Hitler and the unnecessary war, what do the neocons do? Oh, the only reason you could possibly oppose U.S. entry into World War II is because you love Adolf Hitler and you think the Holocaust is cool, or you don't think it happened. Okay? You're an anti-Semite, Pat Buchanan. And so what did the defenders of Buchanan do? Is we were saying, he's not an anti-Semite. What are you talking about? No, you could totally be opposed to U.S. entry into World War II, even if you love Jewish people. What are you talking about? Okay? And that's what we said. And now this guy, though, is saying, oh, yeah, if you want to know who's the Buchanan of today, it's Nick Fuentes. I'm saying, when you talk like that, you're confirming, ex post, what all the critics were saying all along. Oh, and by the way, I don't want to forget about it. Another element in all this, and like Brett, I don't have the clip, I'm not going to bother playing it, but like Brett Weinstein and his wife, when they were talking about this stuff, about, the Tucker interview, and one thing that came out was, in the beginning, Nick was just a regular, I don't know if he was a college Republican, but he was, just a Republican activist, was trying to get Trump elected and whatever, was real sharp on his feet, and was being groomed by people, the Daily Wire, I believe. And then he started asking Ben Shapiro, like, hey, why are we supporting Israel? Or, something fairly innocuous. And then Ben Shapiro came back hard and just said, that's the lowest form of anti-Semitism, to accuse me of dual loyalty or something like that. And then, banished him from the movement. It was like sort of the origin story. Like, geez, why does Lex Luthor hate Superman so much? Oh, see, when they were younger, he liked him, and then Superman blew some chemicals, and that's why his hair fell out. No, okay, that's why he's a supervillain now. Right? So there's that element. But people are saying, geez, look at how hard they came down, and maybe that's, pushed from, you think Ben Shapiro is supposed to feel like he did something wrong? That he said, yeah, this kid asking me this question, I detect lurking anti-Semitism behind it. And then now we've seen what Nick Fuentes turned out to do as he got older and matured and made a name for himself. Do you think Ben Shapiro's kicking himself like, oh yeah, I totally misjudged that kid? Or put it another way, are Nick Fuentes fans really saying, yeah, Ben Shapiro was really out of line treating him that way? The information he had available that he was just generalizing. He was just saying, yeah, in my practice, a lot of people who ask this question about dual loyalty also don't like Jews per se. And I'm going to stereotype and prejudge this individual. And how would you ever do that? I can't believe it. Yeah, it turned out in this case, he did go on to make videos denying the Holocaust and praising Hitler and saying that people who deny the name of Christ should be executed. But I mean, You didn't know that at the time. Jeez. All right. I think I've made my point there. Here's another example. Look at this silver platter you're giving to James Lindsay here. He's got this tweet. I tried to tell you about these people, and he's featuring Clint. And Clint is saying, I think this was Clint's pinned tweet for a bit. My message to every MAGA Inc. talking head who ignored what the America First people had been saying. Oh, you got swept tonight? Good. Keep ignoring us at your peril. And he's got a video there that features Nick Fuentes. Now, if you click Clint's actual video, you'll see in the beginning he's got a short clip from Nick saying completely reasonable things. And then it goes to Clint, talking to the Republican politicians and saying, you told us America first. That's what Trump campaigned on. You haven't delivered. You better start delivering or you're out of office and we're going to hold your feet to the fire. Right. So Clint's all worked up. He didn't say anything about, I don't think 6 million people died in the Holocaust. He didn't say anything like that. Completely defensible, reasonable things. But look at Clint's framing. He shows a picture of Nick Fuentes and he says, good, keep ignoring us at your peril. So Clint is clearly telling the world he is on Nick Fuentes' side. All right, now what Clint means is, on the America First part, I don't stand by the other stuff Clint or Fuentes does, but But do you see how that makes it easy for people to lump us all in together? And that James Lindsay can now run victory laps and say, I tried to tell you about these people. Okay. So yes, Lindsay has been ridiculous, but his technique has been to say, oh yeah, all these guys who are like hiding behind principles and hey, I just want to minimize war and I'm anti, that no, they're actually a bunch of horrible people. They're anti-Semites, they're racist, they're so forth. And I'm saying you're just making it a layup for him with stuff like that. There's no reason to do it that way. Show one more here. So this Brett Cooper lady, she wasn't on my radar. She got upset because Ted Cruz previously had objected to, people using the term Nazi just to mean, somebody I don't like. The Republicans are a bunch of Nazis, right? So he's on record complaining about the left or Democrats using that cheap smear tactic. And then when Ted Cruz got into a Twitter battle with Nick Fuentes, he called him like a little Nazi or something like that. All right. And so then Brett Cooper, this woman, made a video saying, whoa. I thought we weren't supposed to be calling people Nazi and using that as a cheap slur tactic. Jeez, Mr. Cruz, kind of hypocritical much, right? And so Tim Carney comes along and sees this and goes, to clarify, Ted Cruz thinks it's bad to call someone a Nazi for being conservative. Ted Cruz thinks it's fine to call someone a Nazi for loving Hitler. Yes, libs create this confusion by calling us Nazis for being to the right of Bernie Sanders, but no one forced conservatives to be so dumb about it, right? And I think what Tim said there is perfectly reasonable. Now, I haven't seen Carney's other commentary on all this stuff, and for all I know, he said a bunch of stuff that I would disagree with. But I guess let me go ahead and just say this right now before I forget. This is kind of the central point I'm trying to get across. When Daryl Cooper was on Tucker's show and said the thing about, Winston Churchill being the chief villain, and then he said, the stuff about, with the invasion of the Soviet Union, they didn't plan properly, and a bunch of people ended up dead because they didn't have food, and people accused him of denying the Holocaust. Now, he wasn't. That's not what he was. He was talking about that particular invasion. He wasn't talking about, in general, all the people who died in German captivity. Okay? And so a bunch of us came to his defense, including me, to go through and explain all that stuff. Lots of people over the years have been accusing Dave Smith of being an anti-Semite, and he just hates Jews. He's a self-loathing Jew, blah, 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 right? Or he's in the pay of Qatar or something ridiculous, right? I and others have gone to his defense and said, no, he's not. That's a cheap smear tactic, okay? So now what I'm saying is when people have those clips from Fuentes and say, he likes Hitler. The reason he's saying all this stuff, he doesn't like Jewish people. He's anti-Semitic. if the response to that is to say, oh, no, he's not, he's just joking, give me a break, guys. What do you call him, a Nazi for? He's not a Nazi, give me a break. What do you mean? Look, I've had him on an interview one time. He said he thinks everyone should have dignity. So what do you call him a Nazi for? Nazis don't believe in dignity for everyone. Geez, guys, bunch of lies. When you say that, and people can realize, no, that's insane. Those smears against the guy are reasonable. But if you say that to that accusation, then it makes people think, oh, so before, when you were saying Daryl Cooper and Dave Smith and so on actually aren't anti-Semites, should we have trusted you then too? Because it doesn't sound like you have good judgment. It sounds like you just say that regardless of the situation. If no matter what comes out of somebody's mouth, you are never going to say, all right, yeah, that was anti-Semitic. I don't agree with that. But you know what? He says some other things, and let's talk about the main issue, right? So, you see, it's kind of subtle, but I think it's also important. And on that issue, I'll just do an Ian Carroll one just to make sure I offend everybody. So he's retweeting this guy, Michael Hout, I don't know who this guy is, says, I get where Brett Cooper is coming from, but how can you look at Fuentes' statements and call him anything other than a Nazi? He praises Hitler, denies the Holocaust, calls for the murder of, quote, perfidious Jews, right? And that's a quote he does, all right? And so that Ian, retweeting that, says, call me old-fashioned, but it seems like in order to be a Nazi, you have to at least be a National Socialist. Making jokes about Nazis, saying the Nazis were based, saying you like Hitler, and other forms of edgelording sure does make you controversial, but it doesn't actually make you a Nazi. Okay, so are we going to play that game? So if somebody called Mamdani a communist or a commie, like, is that a problem now? Because, well, geez, I mean, I know he's a socialist, but I don't know if he's actually communist. And certainly you can't call him a Leninist. I mean, but give me a break, guys. All right, so I'm saying if that's what we're being reduced to here, that we're just saying, no, you can't call Nick Fuentes a Nazi, or that you somehow contradicted yourself. If in the past, when someone calls Mitt Romney a Nazi, if you said, hey, that's kind of goofy, guys, you're draining the term of any meaning, and now you call Nick Fuentes a Nazi, that you're somehow a hypocrite, I think that's a very weak defense. I think people in the middle, looking at both sides on those points, are going to be like, what are you talking about? Just like Tim Carney did. Okay, so that's the kind of thing I'm talking about in this episode. Let me conclude on a lighter note. I haven't seen anybody comment on this, but to me, the most amazing part of the Tucker Carlson interview of Nick Fuentes was near the end when they start talking about men and women. All right, and so let's go ahead and play that clip.
I do think, I just noticed this, that men who stay unmarried for too long become like kind of fragile. There's something about the give and take. There's something about living with, in fact, I think it's the key to life, someone you don't fully understand that broadens you, that keeps you always thinking, that makes you wiser, more patient, more thoughtful, more self-aware, and more flexible. And those are all good qualities. And the absence of that, like in homosexuality or like men who are single too long, they get very rigid. Have you ever noticed this? Like, I like things the way I like them, and they just get like, no.
Oh, yeah. I certainly get what you mean by that.
Yeah, you don't want that.
Yeah. I would say that when you say you don't fully understand women, to me, I feel like women are very simple in terms of...
Have you ever lived with one?
No, I haven't lived with them, but I mean, and don't get me wrong, maybe it's difficult, but I feel like they're pretty simple.
We're all pretty simple. I mean, no one's more simple than I am, but we're all pretty simple. But what I mean is, like, on a day-to-day, on the level of experience, like, you don't always understand what they're saying because it's never about what they say it's about.
Right.
And men just tend to be kind of dog-like in their straightforwardness. I'm hungry, I'm horny, whatever it is.
I disagree. I feel like men are complicated. I feel like women are like, I'm hungry, I'm horny. I feel like men are very complicated.
Really, how?
Because men are masters of the universe. Women are the universe. This is what Spengler says about them. And so I think that men have like a deep connection to things like math and space, and they want to conquer the world.
Of course.
And, things like this. And women, I feel like, are actually very primal and instinctual.
Yes.
They
Much
want security.
earthier.
Yes. Chthonic. They're of the
100%.
terrestrial.
Never embarrassed by bodily functions. Men are so squeamish.
Yes.
Women are not at all. They give birth. No, that is absolutely true. But I mean, in the way that women present their concerns, there's almost always something that's not being fully expressed. Like, I got mad at you last night because I was pissed about something last year. That's not a male thing to do. You can't remember what happened last year.
Right.
What? Did you hear that? All right. Now you saw Tucker's reaction. He let it go when Nick said, yeah, I like Joseph Stalin. He's always been a hero of mine, or whatever he said. Tucker was a bit surprised, and he said, we'll come back to it. Never did. He let it go. All the other stuff coming out of Nick's mouth, not a big deal. Tucker, move on. But when he said, women are simpler than men, Tucker was like, uno momento, por favor. I got to stop you right there. Now, I've heard a lot of crazy stuff in my day, but that sure takes the cake, and he had to stop him. And say, you ever lived with a woman? And the answer is no. So anyway, I thought that was hilarious. And I guess what I would say, besides it being funny, incidentally, Nick, in case you see this, yeah, the reason men go and study things like that is because you're more likely to solve quantum gravity than to understand why your wife just blew up at you, right? The supernova. Okay, yes, I understand why the star exploded. That makes sense. There's principles at work there that could, in theory, be understood. Other stuff. Hey, women don't know why women do what they do. So there's no chance that you're going to have. All right. So beyond that, me just amusing me and reminding us that, he is, I think, 27. Okay. Beyond that, though, I would just say to all of his fans or whatever, that should be evidence to you that he really does not understand the world as much as you think he does. And yes, he's clever and he has some insights here or there, but there's a lot going on that he's completely oblivious to. All right. And in conclusion, I would say, you want someone with aura? You want to know how to interact with women? Don't listen to Nick Fuentes. Check out Bobby Darin's song, You're Just Too Good to Be True. There's some aura for you. That's my last recommendation. All right, folks. I hope I've made my point clear. Again, let's not allow the other side to conflate these issues. All right. We are undercutting all the work we've done over the years by defending people and saying, no. Just because we're against U.S. support for other governments and going into wars does not mean that we're cool with the Holocaust, things like that. And I'm saying you're undercutting all of that when you say, yes, Nick Fuentes is one of us. We're all kind of saying the same thing. And any objection you bring up, give me a break. That's just, he was making a joke or something. He's just doing edgelord. Give me a break. That's not what he was doing. Let me actually make that one last point. There's a difference between making a joke and putting on a show in which you give your political commentary and trying to make it entertaining. All right. Rush Limbaugh on his show was trying to, and was very entertaining and funny. And you'd be listening to him and you'd laugh occasionally because he was so funny. But he wasn't joking. He wasn't kidding about his views. Okay. And so I'm saying when you watch Nick Fuentes' show, and I will say I watched a few episodes, since I was getting ready to do this, that I at least now understand why people enjoy it. A couple of years ago when he came on my radar and I saw some clips, I didn't even think he was funny. I just didn't even get it. Okay, now at least I get it. I understand why people would watch that. And I can understand, like I said with my analogy in the beginning about drug prohibition and how, well, yeah, if you crack down on it, then the only people who are selling drugs are going to be violent criminals. And so if part of what you don't like about the drug trade is all the drive-by shootings or the impurities and the overdoses, well, it's the prohibition. Likewise, if what you don't like about, it seems like when I go on the internet and all the people talking about American support for Israel and everything, it seems to be imbued with a lot of anti-Semitism too. Well, that's partly because it's a taboo topic. And so the respectable people just stay away from that. So the only people who go into it also don't like Jews per se, right? So don't be surprised if that's the outcome. Okay, so having gone through all that, I'm saying there is a difference between a genuine I was making a joke versus I'm saying serious political commentary and I'm trying to be entertaining and putting on a show. All right? Like, for example, Michael Malice makes a lot of jokes, like if somebody dies or something, he will always do a thing like pretending the person's somebody else or, whatever. A lot of dark humor coming out of his Twitter account. Not my cup of tea. And in fact, Mr. Malice has made clear on several occasions he doesn't like my humor. Fair enough. But I would never critique like his anarchism or something or his flavor of reaching the mass. Or I wouldn't just like hold his jokes as like him being a bad person or something, right? So I can understand the difference between what someone's actual views are on political topics versus their sense of humor. And I'm saying when you watch Nick's show and those clips or whatever, again, he's not just joking. I don't know whether he believes all that stuff. I don't think he does, right? Like when he talks to Dave and whatever, it doesn't seem like he's controlling his disgust reaction because I can't believe I'm sitting across the table from one of these people. No, he's a normal guy. And I think that's why people, when they talk to him, they don't want to sit there and lecture him because he's a normal guy. Okay. But I'm saying the show he's putting on, he's definitely catering to people who want to see that. All right. And so I don't think it works to just say, oh, he's just joking. All right. So in conclusion, again, just to make my point clear, I think the reaction to the Ben Shapiro, Randy Fine, Officer Tatum, all that stuff, to the extent that it was just, oh, here we go again. All they got is anti-Semite, and making it look like you don't think the stuff that Nick said really was dubious, then that would make people think, oh, so in all those other occasions too, maybe that stuff was, because I look at stuff coming out of Nick Fuentes' mouth, that does seem genuinely anti-Semitic and whatever. If you guys are cool with that, okay, but that makes me now wonder when you assured us on all those other examples of Daryl Cooper and whatever, and you told us those guys weren't anti-Semites, they were just had a difference in foreign policy. Well, if you guys are that tone deaf and don't get it, when you got prime, Exhibit A, Nick Fuentes, that Ben Shapiro brings, if you're going to say, no, that doesn't count either, then it sounds like you guys don't think that. I got it. I figured it out. I keep coming up with new examples. You know who else was against Israeli influence on U.S. politics and support for the Israeli government? Mamdani, right? And a lot of people were bringing that element into it, but there's no ambiguity. There's no confusion. Nobody would possibly think that Clint Russell or Dave Smith or Glenn Greenwald, well, maybe not Glenn, Dave Smith or Clint Russell, keep it to them, think of Mamdani as their ally. And oh yeah, we're joined at the hip because really we're both agree on America first. Nobody, we would say that, right? Why? Because, of all the baggage of all his other views that, no, there's so much stuff we disagree with him about, right? And so if what you're saying though is, with Fuentes, yeah, we're totally on board with him. He conquered TPUSA and you better listen to us or else you're all getting voted out. This kid's a rising star, You got to listen to his fan base, all the people that supported him and see. And then when you say, yeah, but what about all these? You say, I don't care about that other stuff. I care about his central core issue, right? What you're saying is, yeah, that other stuff doesn't really bother me. I don't care about that stuff. Whereas like free buses and high marginal tax rates on, New York's highest income earners, that's crazy. I can't support that stuff. He said things about pro-socialism. I can't support that guy. So yeah, I agree with him on the Israel and AIPAC stuff, but no, I can't agree with him. So I'm not buddies with him. So do you see why that would lead many people to understandably conclude, you guys actually don't really care about, all these people saying horrible things to Jewish people online. You don't care one way or the other about that what you care about are your issues. And so maybe hearing this, you say, yeah, I don't. Okay, that's fine. Okay, I'm not trying to tell you to change what you're saying, but I'm saying to the extent that, I actually don't endorse all that other stuff he's doing. My point is, with some of the framing, it comes off as if you do. All right. And so since we're trying to win hearts and minds and convince people in the middle who are looking at both sides, I think that's an unforced error. Okay. I think I've gotten the point across. Thanks for your attention, everybody. See you next time.
You've just experienced another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. For more information and to subscribe to this podcast, visit bobmurphyshow.com.